Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Connect the Disconnected. I'm Mark Seaman, I'm CEO and founder of Staff Circle, and it's great to see you all here today. I can see still there's a few people coming in. Okay, throughout this session, I'm going to be discussing some tips and tricks to help you drive productivity, engagement, and increase retention through your frontline teams. And hopefully we'll be offering some strategic advice on how to systemize and streamline your processes, helping you with the squeeze on your HR and L&D teams, who, to be honest with you, seem to be facing an ever-increasing amount of work without an ever-increasing amount of headcount. So hopefully we can offer some advice and help with that. This webinar is going to be interactive. I'm going to be asking a few questions of you throughout the webinar, just so I can be sure that I'm not sending you all to sleep. And don't worry, this isn't going to be death by PowerPoint. There's only 4 slides, and the whole webinar is probably only going to last about 20 minutes, maybe 25. So hopefully quality over quantity. I'm going to run a poll just so I can set the scenes, and I'm going to ask you what kind of workforce you have, just so I know I've got the right audience, and I'd really appreciate your participation if you could. So I think you should be able to see a poll any second appear, just asking you what kind of workforce you have, and I've got 3 options there. Fantastic, I'm getting feedback already, that's great. Just gives me a sense of who I'm speaking to, and I'll be able to adjust the presentation accordingly. That's fantastic. Great, keep those coming through, thank you. And also at the end of the webinar, I'm going to be sharing with you our latest ebook on activating your frontline. This ebook's called Deskless Not Voiceless. But before we start with that, I'm going to give you a quick description of why I think I might be qualified to talk to you about the subject of engaging and developing frontline workers, because it's a complex subject. And so my experience in frontline started at the age of 16 years old. I was a Leicester lad, and my first job was working in a factory, cleaning oily machine tools down with paraffin in the mid-80s. And obviously health and safety wasn't quite what it is now, but back then the silo between office-based and frontline workers was actually a real silo. Specifically, workers weren't allowed into the offices at all without permission. There were separate toilets, washing up for factory workers, and we had to call the senior managers Mr. and Mrs. or Mr. and Miss rather than by their first name. Now, I think it's safe to say that we've come a long way over the last decade or two. And after that, I discovered computer software. I began my career developing technology for businesses, and over the last 30 years I've been building software for frontline and back office workforces, and I've been lucky enough to work with manufacturers such as Rolls-Royce, retailers like Harvey Nichols, government, military, a whole raft of organizations, including our current treasury. But also my favorite obviously is working with small to medium-sized organizations. That's really where my heart is, and smaller local government. Now, I've been lucky enough to work with some of these amazing organizations to implement technology, which doesn't just improve efficiency, but also improves working experience for many employees. And many of those employees are hybrid, frontline and back office. And so we hold these webinars to help other organizations who have these mixed hybrid and frontline workforces by providing advice, best practice, and sometimes some of you will become valued customers. But this is really about education and us sort of imparting knowledge that we've acquired over the last 8-10 years working with some of the most successful hybrid workforces on the planet. Obviously, as I've said, there's some interactive stuff. We're going to have a Q&A at the end, a short one. And we've also, obviously, I'll field some questions from anytime you have a question, just put it in the chat and I'll tackle it at the end. And we're going to be recording this. So if you've got colleagues, people who you feel might find this useful, then we'll send you the link out over the next couple of days, and you'll be able to share that link with others. But before I start with these slides, I wanted to share with you an interesting statistic. And it might not be one you've come across before, because it's not really an HR related one, but it's something that's quite telling, I think. And that is that by the end of 2024, so far since its inception, $1 trillion would have been spent on SaaS, software as a service, across the world. But during that time, only $28 billion have been spent on HR software, specifically for people and management. I find it very telling, because these tools are really designed to serve the most valuable asset of any organization, which is the people. But there it is. Hopefully we can change some of that. So let's start. I'm going to switch, hopefully, over to my slides, and I'll be able to see the next slide coming up. Hopefully you can see the first slide. Great. So I want to talk to you about silos. I've mentioned it before in my opening, but these aren't really about physical silos, which existed in the 80s. More about process and technology access-based silos, which still accumulate and still cause this us and them type culture. And we see this quite a lot in organizations. And I'm going to give you some specific examples of those. Not all organizations come to us for software initially. Sometimes it starts with a bit of consultancy or professional services. Sometimes they just want some advice about where they have a specific problem. And maybe that problem is with higher churn than they'd like, lower productivity, or worries around succession planning, maybe some aging workforce that have got some very specific skill set, and they're just not able to replace or find people to replace or provide backups for those people. Anyway, these problems are nearly always the top of the iceberg. In other words, the bit that we can kind of see above the water, that actually is the result of some larger things below the surface. And often when we do take a look at these things, we find that the office-based workforce, and you'll obviously refer back to your own organizations when I'm talking about this, your office-based people, or your desk-based, shall we say, people, usually have access to a variety of technologies like Office 365, which includes things like Teams chat, email, and also intranet type sharing stuff. So really, those kind of tools that allow you to share information two ways. And occasionally, there's also some performance management processes in your organizations as well. And sometimes these are using a dedicated tool, or more often than not, Word-based type documents or Excel spreadsheets. But the frontline picture becomes much more fragmented. And this is for a variety of reasons. Often there is some form of yearly appraisal, and essentially a one-way feedback document. Occasionally, still on actual paper, although actually it's not that occasionally. Quite often, the main mechanism is still using paper. But beyond paper, you've got the Word documents, the digital version of that, and the worker, the frontline person, is asked a series of questions, basically to assess, their capabilities and their performance. And access to your internal IT systems or people's internal IT systems usually is extremely restricted or non-existent, because there's no company laptops that can be regulated, and maybe only a few company phones. So the only access mechanism really got is their personal mobile phones. And frequently, due to licensing costs, Office 365 or Google accounts aren't extended to the front line, mainly because obviously they don't necessarily use that access much, and it can add up to quite a lot of money. So this effectively segregates this team, this frontline team, from the information, the main information flows to the business. And sometimes we see that surface up in surveys, and again, occasionally surveys do go to the front line, but generally feedback's pretty restricted. So the bottom line is that these frontline teams are generally disconnected from information flows, the overall information flows to the organization, and these are siloed teams. And Silo teams, no matter what organization, are generally less engaged and do not tend to operate at peak performance. And that has been proven by research after research. That is just a fact. So and also the other important element here is, of course, everybody's frontline workforce is getting younger. I mean, the entire employee base is getting younger, of course, but that just means that that portion of frontline is also getting younger. And these people are digital natives. So they didn't grow up like I did, with ZX Spectrums. These guys or girls, grew up with Instagram and real-time communications capabilities. And that's pretty important to note, because they're going to expect that kind of capability, that digital connectivity at work, even if their day-to-day job is, not in front of a computer. So for our second poll on this session, I'd like to ask a question. And again, we're going to keep these fairly anonymous, but it'd be great if you could choose the most fitting answer. Let me just load this poll up that I've got here, which is, I'm just going to end that current one. And then I'm going to, like I say, new to the software. I'm going to run this other one. So this is basically asking you how you run currently your annual appraisals. It's a pretty important question, really, because again, it will help me gauge kind of an understanding of what sort of tooling and processes you've got in place. Thank you. Appreciate that. Quick responses. It's very useful, very, very useful data for me to have. I'll just wait a few seconds for a few more to come through. Thank you. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So obviously relevant to the next slide. And this one obviously titled Annual Appraisals Are Dead. And that's quite a big, stark statement, as you can imagine. But actually, it's really designed to drive discussions around the performance and the efficacy of single annual appraisals, because we all know they're still taking place. That's a core tool for many organizations, especially ones with hybrid or frontline workforce. However, this kind of statement really serves to sort of bring people's attention that actually, if that's the only source of truth for employee performance and development, then that's going to be problematic and I suspect highly susceptible to bias. And actually, our customers' opinions have been that actually they're not that effective as a single source of truth, because, well, for a number of reasons, but one is they're not that engaging. Many that complete them view them as sort of tick box exercises, and many surveys for frontline have pointed to that fact as well. Actually, at worst, many detest them, which is, obviously then detracting on the overall employee experience. And that's what we're here to kind of drive, right? So we have to ask ourselves, why on earth then are we still relying on single annual appraisals to help steer pretty important financial and career related decisions for employees, but also to deliver management information back to the leadership teams about how the teams are doing? Now, one of the reasons is that actually we all tend to stick to processes we all know. Even if they're not optimal, we kind of stick with the status quo, because I think, and it is evident in speaking to lots and lots of organizations, the thought of changing these processes adds risk, an element of the unknown, and people just don't want to make those mistakes. No one wants to change, wants to be the person that changes a process and finds out a process is not working and actually detracting further value. But the second reason is that actually, in order to change the annual appraisal process, we kind of need to replace it or supplement it with a different solution, and probably with a solution that has much more feedback type elements to it, a bit more varied, different sources of information, and more than likely much more cyclical. So rather than just once a year, we want things a little bit more real time. And the problem with this is, of course, you guys are maxed out, and so you have to have some form of system to drive this and automate this, because it's just too much work to collate and push and chase and do all those things that probably some of you are already or still doing. And that's a couple of main reasons why, there's always a more important problem to fix in the organization. But actually, if this is, this has the capability, if you get it right, to be a real game changer for productivity and retention. So I'd like you all to ask yourself 6 questions, not here, but afterwards, about your current appraisal cycle. Just to kind of frame it for those of you that are still using appraisals. Question 1, how do we make our appraisal process more engaging and work better for the employee, not just for you guys, and not just for the organization? How do we make it more engaging for the employee? That's question number 1. Number 2, how do we factor in not just performance questions, but also include development and cultural or behavioral type questions? Now, I know I've seen plenty of spreadsheets that have got behavioral questions in, but it's definitely worth framing that, any form of appraisal or review should have a balance between performance, development, and culture or behavior. Number 3, how do we increase the regularity of the appraisals to improve the recency of the data? Because let's face it, there is absolutely no point in trying to rely on data that is 12 months old to make strategic decisions in the organization. I mean, you just wouldn't do it in finance. So why are we doing it in people ops? So we need to increase the recency of the data. And the only way you can do that is make it improve the cadence of that information flow. Number 4, how do we empower the managers? Because ultimately, in any organization, the managers are key. The line managers are key to this process. How do we empower the managers to have better conversations, less clunky processes, and better flows with their direct reports in order to facilitate better answers, deeper understanding of growth potential and maybe issues in their work, in their teams, but areas of growth? So how do we empower the managers? That's a real key thing, because that is what's going to help drive this process for your organization. Number 5, how can we factor in feedback, not just from the manager, but from a variety of sources across the organization about each employee, and in doing so, creating a more balanced view of each employee and reducing the impact of any bias that exists. And final question, how do we include skills and competencies of each employee, as well as career aspirations, into this conversation? Because ultimately, it's that kind of varied, balanced conversation is what's going to drive real value. Next slide, actually final slide. It's quite a quick one. But actually, on this slide, I'm going to discuss employee development and progression, because I think this is a crucial thing. If any of you have ever done an exit interview or a number of exit interviews, you will know that the reason people leave organizations, there's a number of reasons, and occasionally they vary, sometimes money is involved, but more often than not, lack of development or perceived lack of development is up there in the top 3. Now, if those of you don't know what a competency framework is, I could give you a 30-second explanation. It's basically a map of your organization from a role perspective. So each role, each person in your organization inhabits a role. And based on your organization's trajectory, what you want to do, how you want to expand, there are a number of roles in the organization for every employee. And then there are probably roles that haven't been filled. And so a competency framework contains the role, the deep description of the role, the succession role, in other words, the next role up if they did move upwards, pathways, whether it's upwards, sideways, or whatever, so how people can move around your organization, talent mobility as it's called. But also, and I think this is crucial, the skills required for each of the roles and the level of competency for each skill required for that role. And for each of those skill levels, a statement. Okay, and this is key, because in order to facilitate the ability for people to understand where they are, what level they are in terms of their skills, not in terms of their entire role, but just the skills required for their role, they need to understand what the current level required for their role is, what they need to be able to do. So anyway, this competency framework once it's built for your entire organization, is crucial to create this consistency, equality, and fairness, because you're running against one single platform, one single set of rules. However, there's a problem. If you think in your organizations, the amount of roles that exist and the number of skills for each role that you require for that role to be effectively executed, and then the levels, the skill levels, and then the words that describe what it means to be at that level, as well as any career pathways, any succession roles, that's a huge amount of data, huge, even for a small organization. I mean, if you think about your teams, HR, L&D teams, and if you're in an SME or a mid-sized organization, you probably just do not have the time, the resources to create that competency framework. Or maybe you've started it, but it's not complete. A medium-sized organization, maybe with 400 or 500 employees, could have up to 200 roles in their organization. And the average time to create a 200 role-based competency framework is 11 months. And that's full time for one person. So if you work that back into cost for pretty much a year's worth of salary, for somebody that actually has that level of capability to be able to create a competency framework, you can see it's an incredibly expensive thing. Not only that, even companies that have created this competency framework, for example, in a spreadsheet, if you guys have got a competency framework in a spreadsheet, it doesn't stop there, because think about it, in order to extract the value of that competency framework, the data within it, you've got to integrate it into your business processes. You've got to build it into the review workflows for the managers, the analytics for the leadership. And many organizational leaders tell me, and I've spoken to a lot of them at shows, that they want this capability that the competency framework delivers, but they're just not there yet. And what that really means is they just don't have the resource to deliver it. And here are the 4 most powerful things once you've got this competency framework and once you've got it integrated into your business processes. These 4 things are just the top 4 things that we see you're able to action at scale across your organization. Number 1, employee development plans. So employee development plans not only give you that visibility of what current gaps they've got in their current role, but if they do choose a succession role, they can choose visually a succession role, and it will show them what skills they need and what levels they need in order to get to that next role. Maybe so they can identify the skills gaps that they need to fill with training and experience and so on in order to get to that next role. Number 2, skills assessments. Now, it's all well and good having the competency framework, which is role-based, but you need to understand where people are right now. You need to have a mechanism that works at scale across your organization, that's simple and easily and effective and can easily be rolled out in order to judge on an ongoing basis where people are in their skills and competency levels. And this is where skills assessments comes in. Number 3, skills gap and single person dependency analysis. That's a bit of a mouthful, but basically, so you've got your skills, your competency gaps across your organization. Now you're able to see them. So that means that L&D, HR, whoever manages your training strategy is able to see specific requirements, by person, by role, by department, by location, and so on, by team. And that's really important because that will allow you to more effectively deliver training that's required. And the second part of this is single person dependency. Being able to visualize people risk across your organization by skill. For example, where you've got one person or a couple of people that only have a particular level of skill capability, say advanced engineering skill, and if that person leaves, then you want to be able to see who else in your organization you can move forwards in that capability so that you can offset that risk. And finally, number 4, succession planning. This is a tool which helps you obviously see which people in your organization can ready to move to new roles. Maybe they, instead of having skills gaps in their current role, they've got excessive surpluses, so they're beyond the role they're sitting in. And that means that actually they probably need to be moved up, or they're probably going to move out at some point. So having that capability to be able to do succession planning, but also being able to understand where in the organization are people that can fill certain capabilities, certain roles. So you may actually have a role that's needed to be filled, and you may have the capability in your teams. You just don't know about them yet, because those skills those people have are maybe not required for the current role, but they came with them. So in summary, having this data-driven approach to employee development and performance is really crucial to removing bias in your organization. It creates a level playing field for everybody, and it gives leadership the deep insights into skills acquisition and capability in order to make better decisions. We've developed a new technology. It's obviously AI assisted, which will allow that 11 months of delivering 200 role competency framework to be delivered in under 60 minutes. I know it sounds crazy, but we spent the last year and a half developing this exciting new capability because we wanted to give the ability that the enterprise guys have got, which is this competency framework, to everybody at any business size. And hopefully you'll be able to see, if you do book a demo with us, we'll be able to demo and show you how this competency framework is built specifically for your organization, customize your organization at scale. So thank you very much for listening once again, and hopefully I'll speak to some of you soon.